Welcome back, everyone, to Occult Archives.
Yes, welcome back.
This is the part of our deep dive where we kind of dust off some of history's most, well, notorious books, I guess you could say.
That's right.
And we look beyond just the stories, and we try to kind of uncover the secrets that made them so feared, but also so captivating to so many people.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were talking about these books that, promise incredible power, ancient texts that, people whisper about, holding dangerous secrets.
Right.
Things that maybe, you think, oh, is this knowledge I should even be looking into?
Right, exactly.
For episode 220, we're diving into, well, the world of alchemy.
Yes. Collectanea Chemica, Alchemical Secrets of the Philosopher's Stone.
Ah, the Philosopher's Stone. So for this one, we've got a really fascinating collection of texts all in one place.
We do.
Kind of a who's who of alchemy.
That's right.
We've got Eirenaeus Philalethes, Dr. Francis Anthony, George Starkey, Sir George Ripley, and we've even got some anonymous work that's attributed to Edward Kelly.
Yeah, that's right. And all of that was compiled, edited and compiled by Arthur Edward Waite, towards the end of the 19th century.
Now, these texts are really interesting because of how far back they go.
They do.
Waite himself said that the edition he worked on was based on manuscripts that were already copies, like transcriptions, of even earlier writings, which are lost to time.
That's right, yeah.
So we're really going way back with this. We're kind of tracing a lineage of this secret knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Getting as close as we can to those original alchemists.
Absolutely.
And, if you've ever tried to read an original alchemical text, you know what I mean? They're really hard. They got this archaic language, this weird capitalization, punctuation that makes no sense.
Right.
I mean, you practically need, like, a secret decoder ring.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a challenge.
We've tried to streamline things a bit for our deep dive today, but we're definitely still aiming for that kind of that old world, like, ancient feel.
Yeah, I think that's important. But I think before we dive into all that, we should probably, remind ourselves that the Philosopher's Stone wasn't just about turning lead into gold, right? That wasn't the sole focus.
Yeah, it was more than just a get-rich-quick scheme.
Yeah.
I mean, these alchemists, they were obsessed with finding this universal medicine, something to cure all diseases and make people live longer.
Yes.
Like, wealth might have been a nice bonus.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the only thing they were after.
No, absolutely. Okay, so let's dive into some of these concepts.
Okay.
And I think a good place to start is the Alkahest from Eirenaeus Philalethes.
Okay.
Now, he called this substance immortal liquor and the very dramatic fiery water, or ignis aqua in Latin.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Fiery water. Yeah, that definitely paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does. And, the properties he gives it are just as dramatic. So he describes this Alkahest as this universal solvent.
Okay.
It can break down any substance back to its, original liquid matter. And the crazy thing is, he says, it does this without changing itself at all.
Wait, so it can break down anything, but it doesn't get affected by what it's breaking down?
That's what he claims, yes.
Wow, that is a pretty powerful idea, if it were real.
Yeah.
A substance that can just dissolve anything and come out the other side unchanged.
Yeah.
I mean, the possibilities are, that's huge.
Huge.
Yeah. So what is this thing made of?
Okay, so he describes it as a noble circulated salt.
Go ahead.
And he says it's a saline spirit that you can't coagulate, even with heat. And he's very specific that it's neither an acid nor an alkali, just purely a salt.
Okay.
And then he throws in this very cryptic line.
Okay.
He says, if you really understand the Alkahest,
Okay.
you'll know what its equal is.
Mm-hmm.
So it implies that, understanding one principle unlocks others.
Oh, so there are other things like the Alkahest out there.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, so it's like a whole secret system where, if you crack one part,
Right.
the rest starts to make sense.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then he goes on to talk about what he calls the next matter of the Alkahest.
Okay.
And he describes this thing called Philosopher's fire, which is made from salt surrounded by fire. And then, here's the kicker, swallowed by water.
Swallowed by water.
But fire and water,
I know, right?
Sure.
But that's the thing. He says it's not extinguished by the water.
Wow. Okay, so this fire, this Philosopher's fire, is it like a real fire?
Well, it's hard to say. It sounds very symbolic, right?
Yeah.
Of something that can exist in contradictory states.
Right. Okay, so this is all very mysterious. But he does eventually give some specifics, right?
Yeah.
About, how to actually make this Alkahest.
He does. And this is where it gets even more interesting, right? So he asks this question. He says, which is the most noble salt?
Okay.
And his answer kind of points us inward.
He says to look within ourselves. Because we carry both the salt and its active principle, which he calls Vulcan.
Okay.
And then he just comes right out and says it, man's blood or man's urine.
Wow. Okay, urine. So, I mean, I guess that's not what I was expecting.
No. But he claims that urine is like separated from the blood, right?
Okay.
And that both contain both these volatile and fixed salts.
Okay.
And if you know how to collect them and prepare them correctly, you could get what he calls a most precious balsam of life.
Balsam of life, huh?
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? He's looking at something like urine, which most people think of as waste.
Right.
But he sees it as this fundamental connection to our very being.
Yeah, that's a pretty different way of looking at things.
It is. It reflects this alchemical idea that the human body, it's a microcosm of the universe.
Okay.
And that by understanding ourselves, we can unlock these greater secrets.
Yeah, it's like they believed we hold these keys within us to all these mysteries. So he's saying urine is the key to this balsam of life.
Well, he actually goes even further. He says that human urine is far nobler than any animal urine.
Really?
Yeah, he claims its salt is unique in all of nature.
But it's still urine, right? I mean, it's a waste product.
I know, it's a strange perspective, but he breaks it down, right?
Okay.
He says it has this volatile part and then a fixed part.
Okay.
And that you can change them through different alchemical preparations.
Okay.
And he also talks about the phlegm in urine, which comes from what we drink.
Okay.
And sea salt, which comes from our diet.
Right.
He says those are undigested and can be separated.
So even urine has its own, impurities in a way.
Right.
Okay. So he's got this whole system for understanding urine.
He does.
I mean, he's even talking about its physical properties. He mentions it weighs more than water, and that when you distill it, it leaves behind a lot of salt. He even brings up that urine freezes in cold temperatures as, evidence for its phlegm content, saying that pure urine salt wouldn't freeze so easily.
Right. And then he gets into pyrotechny.
Pyrotechny. Like fireworks?
Not exactly. It's more about using fire in chemical processes.
Okay.
And he talks about how fire can make the salt of urine volatile and leave behind this black residue.
Okay.
Which, by the way, he says smells really bad.
Oh, lovely. So what happens to this volatile urine salt?
Well, he says it has these contradictory qualities, like one part can coagulate something called the dulec, and another part can dissolve it.
The dulec? What in the world is the dulec?
It's not totally clear. He doesn't give a direct definition, which, that's alchemy for you, right? Lots of veiled language.
Right.
But based on the context, I think it probably refers to some kind of, concretion or impurity that you're either trying to form or get rid of.
Interesting. So urine, fire, dulec. What else does he have in store for us?
Well, he talks about finding a spirit of wine in urine.
A spirit of wine in urine.
Yeah, through putrefaction. And then, he says, if you combine it with saltpeter and distill it several times, you get this most piercing spirit that's not as sharp as it was originally. He even says he saw oily streaks when he shook it. It's like he's identifying different compounds in urine.
Right. Okay, so you've got all these different spirits and salts in urine. What's he doing with them?
Okay, so he talks about using different methods of putrefaction.
Okay.
Like using gentle heat versus the heat of horse dung.
Horse dung.
Horse dung, yeah, to get different spirits. One that can coagulate aquavitae, and others that can either form or dissolve the dulec. And remember, putrefaction in alchemy, it's not just about things rotting, it's about breaking down a substance to its basic parts so you can recombine them into something new.
Oh, okay, so it's like a controlled decay almost.
Yeah, exactly.
With a purpose.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this whole urine thing going on. But earlier he mentioned blood too, right?
He did. And he says that the Alkahest itself can't exist without the virtues of man's blood. But that urine just shows its footsteps, as he puts it.
Okay, so there's a link between them.
Yeah, a deep connection.
Okay.
So he basically says you use pyrotechny on blood and urine, and you get this salt that you can circulate into a Paracelsus called circulated salt. And the goal is to change the blood using this urine ferment to make it even better, and then somehow transfer that back to the urine.
Okay, so we're going from blood to urine back to blood.
Yeah, it's a cycle. It's all connected.
Wow, that's a pretty wild idea. So from urine, we get this universal solvent and this balsam of life.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to something maybe a little more palatable.
Okay.
Dr. Francis Anthony's Aurum Potabilia.
Ah, yes.
Drinkable gold, which he says is an excellent medicine for the body of man.
Right.
So this sounds a little more like a direct, medical application.
Yeah, it does.
So how do you make this drinkable gold?
Okay, so he gives this very specific recipe, right?
Okay.
And the first step is making what he calls a menstruum. It's another word for a solvent. And you make this from block tin and strong red wine vinegar.
Block tin and vinegar.
Okay. And it's not just mixing them together.
Okay.
You have to burn the tin repeatedly, infuse the residue in a hot bath with the vinegar,
Okay.
filter it, and then distill it. And this whole cycle, he says, you have to do it at least 7 times.
7 times. Wow, that's a lot of work. Why 7 times?
Well, in alchemy, 7 is a pretty important number.
Okay.
It often represents completion or purification.
Okay, so it's not just like a random number.
Yeah.
It has some meaning.
Right.
Okay, so after all that, what about the gold? I mean, this is drinkable gold we're talking about.
Right. So you take pure refined gold.
Okay.
And you turn it into what he calls a fine white calyx. It's like a powdery ash.
Okay.
And you do this by heating it with white salt in a calcining vessel for 4 hours, grinding it, and then repeating that heating and grinding 4 or 5 times.
So you're basically burning the gold to a powder.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. And how much of this powder do you get from like a regular chunk of gold?
He says you only get a tiny amount, like 16 or 17 grains from an ounce of gold.
Wow, so most of the gold is lost.
Well, transformed, maybe.
Transformed. Okay, so what do you do with this gold powder?
So you take that precious gold powder, the white calx, and you combine it with that menstruum you made.
Okay, the tin and vinegar stuff.
Exactly. And you put them together in a hot bath for 6 days, shaking them frequently. And the goal is to extract a colored liquid, what he calls a tincture, from the gold.
Okay.
And then you carefully pour that liquid off, and you're left with this residue he calls feces, which is like a black earth.
So what happens to the black stuff?
Well, you might think it's just waste, right?
Yeah.
But he doesn't throw it away. He actually extracts another red tincture from it using spirit of wine in a cold place. It's like they wanted to get every last bit of, whatever they thought was valuable out of everything.
Right, so nothing goes to waste.
Right.
Okay, so we've got these tinctures. What's the last step?
You combine all the tinctures, the gold ones and the one from the black earth.
Okay.
And distill them together until they're like syrup. And then, he says, you take 1 ounce of this tincture.
Okay.
And you mix it with a pint of canary sack.
Canary sack. What's that?
It's a type of sweet white wine. And you let it sit for a day and a half, and then it's ready to drink.
Wow. Drinkable gold wine. That sounds intense.
It does, right. He also gives very specific instructions for preparing the vinegar, saying it has to be distilled multiple times to make it strong.
So precision is key.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about George Starkey and his oil of sulfur.
Okay.
He says it has, quote, admirable efficacy and almost incredible virtue.
Okay, so another powerful elixir.
Right. And he starts off by talking about Helmont, who tells this amazing story about a man who was 58 years old,
Okay.
who took 2 drops of this oil before every meal. And this guy lived to be 99. 99. And he was rarely ever sick, even broke his leg when he was older and didn't get a fever.
Wow. 99 healthy.
That's what they claimed, yeah.
That's pretty good endorsement. So what did Starkey himself say about this oil of sulfur?
He goes on and on about how good it is at preserving things, not just living things, but also dead flesh.
Okay.
And it can preserve drinks like beer and wine. He even says it can revive drinks that have gone bad and that it could be used to make what he calls a mummial balsam, which also acts as a preservative.
A mummial balsam. Is that like made from mummies?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
In alchemy, mummial usually refers to like an essence or a resin that they thought could preserve life. So it's more like a potent preservative he made through alchemy.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
Right. And then he gets into all these practical uses for it.
Like what?
Like cleaning teeth. He says it whitens teeth to a purest ivory and prevents tartar and tooth decay.
Wow. Okay.
And it can help with pain, too. He also mentions coughs, hoarseness, sore throats, headaches, eye problems, skin conditions. You can use it internally, gargle with it, or apply it directly.
So it's like a cure-all.
Well, they certainly thought it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it seems like it.
And it doesn't stop there. He says internally, it prevents and gets rid of corruption in the body.
Okay.
Clears obstructions, takes away old pains. It can prevent problems like urinary issues and colic from coming back.
Wow.
And he even says it tastes good. A little sharp, but not like the acidity of rotten things. He also mentions that it's safe to use all the time.
Okay, so this sounds almost too good to be true. Were there any downsides?
There were, and he's very vocal about them. He warns people about fake oil of sulfur being made from regular sulfur and vitriol, which he says is dangerous.
Okay, so there were fakes even back then.
Yeah, apparently so.
What's the difference between the real one and the fake one?
He says the real oil comes from what he calls sulfur-vive.
Okay.
And it's clear, heavy, very acidic, doesn't react with mercury. It makes silver filings taste bitter, and it preserves drinks really well.
And the fake one?
Well, he thinks it's made from impure sulfur, maybe with harmful minerals in it.
Oh, okay.
So it could actually hurt you.
Right.
He's really concerned about this, calls it a deceitful practice that endangers people.
So he was basically trying to protect people from these shady alchemists.
Yeah, and to uphold the reputation of real alchemy, he even tells people where to get the real oil of sulfur.
Wow, it's like an early version of like a consumer protection agency or something. Okay, so we've talked about the Alkahest, we've talked about Aurum Putabil, this oil of sulfur. I think it's time to tackle the big one.
Yeah, the stone of the philosopher.
The legendary philosopher's stone. We have contributions on this from an anonymous author who's thought to be Edward Kelly.
Right.
And, of course, Sir George Ripley.
Yeah, this is the heart of it all, right? The creation of the stone itself.
Absolutely. So this anonymous author starts off, he's lamenting the lack of good English writing on the topic.
Yeah. He says he wants to make it clear and simple for people.
Okay.
Oh, and he also says, if you're poor, don't even try this.
Really? Why?
Because it's expensive.
Oh, okay, so there goes my weekend project.
Yeah.
He also mentions that you need a trustworthy assistant and a lot of patience, because this process takes a long time, like 7 to 9 months.
Yeah.
So it's not something you just whip up in an afternoon.
No.
Okay, so what's his goal with this writing?
He says he wants to give knowledge to those who already believe the stone is possible.
Okay.
So he's not trying to convince anyone.
Right.
And he wants to give them the tools to tell real alchemical writing from the fake stuff.
So like a guide for the initiated, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he's going to reveal the first matter and the methods for making both the vegetable and metallic tinctures.
Starting with the vegetable tincture.
Right.
So wait, there's a plant-based version of the Philosopher's Stone?
Not exactly. The vegetable tincture, it's kind of like a preliminary step.
Okay.
It demonstrates the principles in a simpler way. He actually says that not many real philosophers wrote about it because it's not as important as the metallic work.
Okay, so even in alchemy, there's like levels?
Yeah.
Okay.
But he does mention a book called Aphorisms, See Circulus Majus et Circulus Minus,
Okay.
which he says is a really clear guide on the subject, written by a master.
Okay, so if someone wants to learn about the vegetable tincture, that's the book to get.
Yeah.
But can you give us like a quick rundown of the process?
Sure. So first, you extract a tincture from a plant using spirit of wine or distillation.
Okay.
Then you take the leftover plant matter, they call it feces, or caput mortuum.
Caput mortuum, that sounds ominous.
It means deadhead.
Oh, okay.
And you calcine that to ash. Then you combine the ash with the tincture or distilled water and distill it again. And you keep repeating this calcination and what they call cohobation.
Cohobation?
Yeah, it's basically pouring the distilled liquid back onto the residue and distilling again.
Okay.
And you do that until you get this white or oily substance, kind of like a strong alkali.
Okay.
And that substance, it can change color to yellow or even red.
Okay, and what do you do with these tinctures?
Well, he says the yellow one is stronger. But both of them eventually become these thick essential oils.
Okay.
And if you put other plants in them, they'll extract the virtues of those plants.
So it's like it concentrates the power of the plants.
Exactly. And he says this is different from normal distillation or extraction because those methods only get the volatile parts or resins, but they leave behind the plant's soul, or what they call the essential salt.
The plant's soul, huh? So what exactly is that?
So they believed that to get the full power of the plant, you need its soul, which is the essential salt, and its spirit, which is the inflammable sulfur. And you get rid of the body, which is just the earthy matter.
So you're separating like the essence of the plant from its physical form.
Right. And then you put them back together, and it's like a resurrection, but with greater virtue.
Wow, that's pretty deep.
It is. And they thought this was much better than just growing more of the plant from seed.
So it's not just about quantity, it's about quality.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he even says you can keep improving this tincture, like infinitely.
Infinitely?
Yeah, by circulating it over and over, adding more spirit or tincture each time.
Wow, okay.
Attracting good stuff, getting rid of bad stuff.
So it's a continuous process of refinement.
Yeah.
Okay, but How does this plant stuff relate to the big prize, the metallic tincture, the Philosopher's Stone?
So he says the metallic process follows the same basic ideas,
Okay.
but it's a lot harder.
Okay.
You need more heat and more time. And it's really important to understand what metals are made of so you can break them down into their first principles, like, the moist vapor, the sulfur, the salt.
Okay.
He even mentions that a guy named Sendivogius said that making the stone will one day be as easy as making cheese.
As easy as making cheese. I don't think we're quite there yet.
No, I don't think so either.
Okay, so any other warnings?
Yeah, he says don't do this just for money.
Okay.
He emphasizes that it's primarily a medicine.
Right, right.
Oh, and he makes this interesting point that the real process isn't that expensive.
Really?
Yeah, because the materials you need, the metallic ores, they're easy to get.
So it's not about being rich, it's about knowing the secrets.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do metals form, according to him?
Okay, so he says it starts with this moist vapor that mixes with air, and then it congeals into an oily water.
Okay.
And that combines with sulfur and salt. And the different types of metals, they come from different impurities and the quality of the earth that surrounds them.
Okay.
And he says that the philosopher's mercury is this moist vapor, and it's in everything.
It's in everything.
Yeah. And he warns people not to look for the perfect mineral in plants or animals.
Okay, so you have to go straight to the source, the minerals themselves, and the first matter of metals.
It's their ores.
Okay.
He says they contain the seed, just like wheat is in grain.
Okay, so the ores are like the potential for the metal and the process.
You have to dissolve the ores in the right way.
Okay.
Into what they call mercury, which is like the water of life, and sulfur, which is an earthy substance.
Okay, so mercury and sulfur, they're not the actual elements.
No, they're philosophical concepts.
Right, okay.
And the mercury is associated with feminine qualities.
Yeah.
And sulfur with masculine qualities.
Okay.
You separate them, and then you combine them carefully with heat, and that creates the quintessence.
The quintessence.
Right. Now, dissolving the metals, that's the key.
Okay.
But he says the philosophers were intentionally vague about whether you should use ores or refined metals.
Why?
To keep the unworthy from learning the secrets.
Ah, okay. So it's like a test.
Yeah.
If you're not meant to know, you'll get misled.
Exactly.
Okay.
He uses the philosophical duel as an example.
Okay.
It mentions copper, which is a refined metal, to throw people off.
Ah, okay.
But he says you can actually get the metallic seed, the mercury, from any metal.
Okay.
But lead is easier.
Okay, so lead is the beginner's choice.
Right.
Okay, so you've got your ore. What do you do with it?
So first, you have to get rid of the impurities. Okay, how?
By pounding it, washing it, and calcining it.
Okay.
Then you put it in a sealed container and heat it.
Okay.
This is putrefaction again. And this awakens what they call the central fire, and it lifts and condenses the radical moisture into the philosopher's true mercury.
Okay, so this mercury, this is the stuff you need for the stone.
It's a key ingredient, yeah.
Okay, and what happens after putrefaction?
So you get what they call philosophical earth and water.
Okay.
The water has the seminal virtue, and the earth is like a container. You keep the water separate.
Okay.
And then you calcine the earth really strongly to purify it.
Okay.
Then you put the mercury back into the calcined earth, and then you distill it, calcine it, coabate it.
Coabate it, right. Pour the liquid back on.
Yeah, and distill it again. You do this over and over until the mercury is accuated by the sulfur.
Accuated. What does that mean?
It basically means it's become more potent, more active.
And the sulfur gets purified to white and then red. And then you have the philosophical male and female principles ready for their mystical marriage.
The mystical marriage, so this is where the real magic happens.
You could say that.
Okay, so how do you perform this mystical marriage?
Okay, so you take the prepared seed, which is the mercury,
okay,
and the earth, which is the sulfur, and you combine them very carefully in a strong glass vial, and you seal it tightly. Then you heat it gently to help them digest until they form a dry.